Nigerian economy has started to experience gradual recovery from the negative effects of COVID-19 pandemic, going by the sharp output contractions in the second and third quarters of 2020, as GDP growth turned positive in Q4 of 2020, reaching a 0.5% year-on-year in Q1 of 2021. Supported by agriculture and services sector. According to the latest Consumer Price Index report from the National Bureau of Statistics, the Nigerian inflation figures or rates for the month of July dropped further to 17.38% compared to 17.75% recorded in June 2020, representing a 0.37% decline in the rate of inflation compared to the previous month. Now, this recent data indicates a fourth consecutive decline in inflation rates, despite the subtle decline recorded in the review month, as prices of goods and services increased significantly as the CPI surged by 17.38% compared to the corresponding period of 2020. However, with sustained recovery in economic growth and moderation in inflation, there are projections that Q2 GDP rates will range between 2.6 to 3.2%. Due to base year effects. Well, joining me now live in the studio to discuss all of this and, of course, other economic issues. I'll call it the immediate past Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry is no other person but Dr. Muda Yusuf. Good afternoon, Dr. Yusuf. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure.
Yes, I would like to start this way. Fourth consecutive month, we've seen a decline in inflation. A lot of reactions have trailed this development, as some say it doesn't look like this is what we see out there when we go to the markets, the gradual increase or not. Now, what do you make of, what are we doing right? Let me ask it that way. If we are doing anything right, what can we do to get better? Does this mean that the recovery has really started with all the challenges that we face as a country?
Well, thank you very much. As far as the inflationary situation is concerned, I wouldn't say that we are doing much right, going by the evidence that is staring us in the face. You just read an economic report, a review, and you touched on a very vital part of item that is critical to the common people, which is bread. And even from your report, I saw that for most of their inputs, many prices have doubled.
Yes.
And in some cases, even more than double.
Yes.
So when you relate some of these realities to the numbers that we have, of course, when we talk about inflation, we are talking of a basket. But as far as the man on the street is concerned, the situation has been deteriorating. It has been getting worse. Because we are talking about headline inflation of just about 17%. Yes. Now, from what is happening in reality, many prices have doubled. So we are talking about almost 100% increase. I mean, you need to talk to housewives, you know, and of course other women that interface directly with the markets. The situation is really very bad. But we must acknowledge that, of course, we have seen some deceleration. Headline inflation decelerated by 0.37%. Yes. Food index declined by 0.8%. Then the core inflation was the only one that increased by 0.63%. And let me explain this. Core inflation is that component of inflation that is driven essentially by imports. That's when you have the basket and you take away the agricultural products. What is left are what you can call the core items that are defined as core inflation driven. So those ones, a lot of forex impact is on them. So while the headline inflation declined, the food sub-index declined, the core inflation increased. Possibly because of the challenges that we are facing in the foreign exchange market. Okay. I mean, which again was part of the things that the Bread Association was talking about. But generally, inflation, food inflation at over 21% is still a lot. It's still a very intense situation. It's something that we need to worry about because of the impact on poverty. The president had said that the government will lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years. With what is happening to inflation now, the reality is that more and more people are dropping into poverty. Of course, there may be a few people maybe around the agri value chain and all of that who are making some good business. Because sometimes the interests of the producer may not be in tandem with the interests of the consumer. The producer may be making money while the consumers are groaning because of scarcity. And when there is scarcity, even what is produced locally becomes very expensive. So for the average consumer, it is not a good story at all to tell. And it's something that we need to worry about. Headline inflation at 17.38%.
Yeah.
That is also very high. And the core inflation, of course, at 13.72%. So all the metrics of inflation, even though we have witnessed a marginal deceleration in inflation, all these metrics are still on the very high side. And for me, the situation is so bad that I think it requires an emergency response from government. Because when we have situations, first, the unemployment rate is very high. A lot of businesses are not doing well. Some of them have laid off their staff. Some of them are not paying salaries as at when due. Some of them are paying half salaries or whatever they can afford to give their workers. And at the same time, prices are galloping the way they are galloping. So it has very significant welfare implications for citizens. And governance is about people. Economic management is about human beings. It's not so much about these figures. These figures, to the extent that they translate into improvement in welfare, that is good. But to the extent that they are disconnected, then the greater emphasis should be on how to impact on the welfare of the people. So the inflationary situation is taking a huge toll on the citizens. It has implications for poverty. It has implications for the social cost. And it also has implications for economic costs. And it also has implications even for political costs. Because all of this is about also governance. The average man will say that, look, under this regime, look at what the prices are saying.
Yes.
I cannot feed, I cannot do this, I cannot meet basic things. So it requires an emergency response. Something similar to what we are doing with COVID. We need to deal with this inflation problem. There are, of course, quick wins that you can be looking at. There are short-term measures, there are medium, and there are long-term. But it's something that we need to deal with. Then, from the point of view of business, costs are also going up.
Too much.
Costs are going up, and it is not in all cases that businesses can transfer additional costs to consumers. So this is why some businesses are collapsing. Because if your costs are going up, you cannot transfer it to the consumers, then what are you in business for? You are not in business for charity. So this is also affecting businesses. It's affecting productivity. It's affecting profit margins. It's affecting the capacity of business to continue to be in business. So these are very significant effects that this inflationary situation is having. It's impacting businesses and it's also impacting the citizens. So my appeal is that we need to treat this as an emergency. The president needs to constitute the presidential task team to look at how we deal with these issues of prices. Because the pain on the citizens is a lot. Because when you cannot afford basic things, we are talking of food, very basic things, food, pharmaceutical products, and all of that.
It is a problem.
It's a major problem. There may not be a lot of noise out there, but the pain is immense. For those who are close to the grassroots, they know that the situation is not palatable at all. So we need to deal with these issues of inflation. As you go along, maybe I will have to highlight the key drivers.
Yes. We're going to go there, but as you were just making your first submission, which really brushed up the whole topic of discourse, something came to my mind. We talk many times about the fiscal side and the monetary side needing to work together, synergize to actualize the dream of this inclusive growth that we talk about. But I want to ask a question. We see a lot from the monetary side. Too many interventions. Maybe impact, I don't know what level we call it. Maybe we are still in the transition period, I don't know, but a lot of impact. Now, but the fiscal side, come up with tolls today, come up with increase in price of plate numbers. So people say that it's like one way or the other, they're almost contradicting each other. What more can they do to synergize better, and so that we can get at least a little bit of growth, steady growth in the economy?
You see, in matters like this, there are specific policy issues, fiscal, monetary. There are also things that are happening within the macroeconomic management framework. You know, all of these things interplay. On the monetary side, yes, a lot has happened. But you see, money is not everything. If you have a problem, we are talking of Northeast and all of that. If you are throwing money at farmers in the Northeast, what are they going to do with the money? Or Northwest, or areas where kidnappers are harassing people? If you give people money and access to locations, it's a problem. They cannot travel to the situation because of security problem, because of infrastructure problem. That could be an issue. I have seen businesses who got the intervention funds. They couldn't even get the raw materials
to produce.
I've seen companies who got the intervention funds, they couldn't get the machineries to import because there is no foreign exchange. So all of these things work together. It is one thing to put the naira on the table. It's another thing for those who need a bit of foreign content in their production to be able to get the foreign exchange. Quite a number of them now are carrying the intervention funds in their accounts. They can't move forward with it because of the liquidity problem in the foreign exchange market. So on one hand, yes, the CBN is doing a great deal in terms of development finance. On the other hand, we have a major crisis in the foreign exchange area. You can see a lot of firefighting going on.
Yeah.
Today is BDCs, tomorrow is the fintech, next tomorrow is microfinance, you know. So there's a fundamental issue. And these are systemic because all these variables need to work together properly. And on the fiscal side, of course, the fiscal side needs to do a lot in terms of productivity, needs to do a lot in terms of improving the investment climate. Because it is the climate of business that can drive productivity. So there's a lot that needs to happen around issues of the infrastructure. Although that is not a quick win. You cannot fix infrastructure overnight. And again, the amount you can spend on infrastructure is also depending on what is available in the budget. The infrastructure deficit is huge. So if you are talking of short or quick wins, investing in infrastructure may not quickly deliver the quick wins. We must acknowledge that the government is doing quite a lot in this space.
That's true.
But again, you can only do so much because of the financial or budgetary constraints. Then we have issues around taxation. Tax is also an issue. A lot of people are struggling in business. But sometimes, for some of them, the tax environment is also stifling. You are struggling with FRS, you are struggling with Lagos Internal Revenue, you are struggling with the local government levies and all of that. You are struggling sometimes with area boys. These things put a lot of pressure on those who are doing business. And if you are saying that you want to create jobs, these are the people that will create the jobs. So if the environment is becoming too difficult for them, then we have issues with the ports. In a way, it's also a fiscal or institutional problem, which is affecting the business environment. You have issues around the energy cost. It's not a monetary thing.
Part of key drivers, right?
Yes, these are some of the key drivers. The cost of diesel has gone haywire. And if you don't have power, electricity supply from public, you have to use diesel.
Yeah.
I know what the cost of diesel is, and you have some businesses, like the broadcast industry now. You can't tell your viewer that because there is no power, you are not broadcasting. You have to 24/7. If you check with your accountant how much the company is paying for diesel, you will marvel. So all of these things are putting pressure. So there are issues, a lot of issues on the fiscal side, even on the monetary side, apart from the fact that development finance is made available. issues around Forex is still a problem.
It's a problem. It's a problem.
And we need to deal with it.
It's a problem.
And it's part of the, now we said the BDCs are not the best. They have issues, granted. We have moved it from the BDCs to the banks. What stories are we getting now? Maybe tomorrow things will be, but so far, no significant impact. Because there are issues with fundamentals. If you have a problem with fundamentals in managing an economy, you'll be struggling with the symptoms if you don't deal with the causes, the fundamental problem. And that is what is happening. Now we have even top corporate institutions. Because they cannot source foreign exchange from the official window, some of them are patronizing parallel markets. And you go to parallel market before you know what is happening, the CBN or EFCC will be after you. Where did you get your forex? What is the source? And all of that. All of these things are creating a lot of headache for those who are investors in this economy. And talking about drivers, of course, we have other drivers. The exchange rate depreciation is a major driver.
Major one.
The moment we move from BDCs to the banks, exchange rates have jumped to over 500. That is where we are still now. Because the thing is, I'm not making a case for BDCs.
Yeah, I understand.
But the BDCs are closer to SMEs.
Yes.
They are closer to the informal sector. People have better access to them. There is very little documentation. And whether you like it or not, this economy is driven largely by the informal sector and all these SMEs. Yes. They are not so comfortable with the banks and the documentation and the time it takes. Because they are concerned about speed, promptness of transaction. This doesn't work so much with the bank. But we wait and see, and see what So the exchange rate situation is a major problem. And what I think should happen, and we have said this several times. I don't want to sound like a broken record. We need to adopt a market-based mechanism in the foreign exchange market. That is what can bring sanity to this system. Then, of course, there is liquidity problem in the foreign exchange. Even if you have your naira you want to buy in the NAFEX window, how much can you get? How much can you get? And there are some production processes. Even if you have 90% local content and you need 10% foreign content, if you don't have that 10%, you don't have a product. So when we are talking about Forex, it's not as if all of them are so heavily dependent on imports. But the proportion of import that you need to complete your production, if you don't have it, you don't have a product. So that is creating a lot of problems for quite a lot of people. Then we have issues around security. Security is taking a major toll on productivity, especially in the agricultural sector. So it's a major factor. We must acknowledge the government is doing a lot to solve this problem. But as citizens, we want an end to it.
End to it. True.
We want an end to it. True. We have stories of how some Boko Haram have surrendered, this and that. But what we want to see is an end to this insecurity. Kidnapping, insurgency, killings, all these things. They are affecting the supply side of the economy. True. And once the supply side begins to crumble, it affects prices. Which is what we are witnessing. Even though we are now in harvest season and all of that, prices are supposed to be dropping significantly. But it's not happening. And that is why you are even seeing a lot of figures in terms of food imports. Because even what is locally produced is even far more expensive. You know? Then, of course, you have issues around the environment, for instance, desertification, flooding, and all of that. We have issues with productivity. We have issues with the cost of inputs, even for agriculture.
Because feeds and all of that.
Yes, feeds, agrochemicals, pesticides, even farm machineries. Most of these things are not available locally.
Honestly.
So they still need this foreign exchange to be able to buy these things, even grow what we eat. Because the slogan is that we should eat what we grow.
Are we likely to grow at this pace, saying 2% as we move on in 2021? It's a few months to the end of the year. I don't know. What do you think about that projection? Because time is fast spent.
You see, the projections you may have it, depending on
how inclusive.
How inclusive? I mean, so if you talk to the citizens now, they are worse off now than when we were even in recession. They are worse off now. So the issue is not so much about some of these figures. Sometimes some of these figures can just be academic.
Yes.
The reality that is hitting people is much more than this GDP growth. I'm not diminishing the importance of GDP numbers.
Yeah.
They reflect some positivity in the economy.
Yes.
But if you want to talk in practical terms, you have to relate to what is happening in the marketplace. We are talking of inflation of 17%. Prices are doubling in many instances. That's 100% increase in price. So these things are very, very challenging. And I must also make this point. There's a monetary side to the inflationary phenomenon. The rate at which the CBN is financing deficits is very alarming. And it's something that we need to curb. If you don't curb it, this inflationary situation will continue to worsen. And if it continues this way, it is the common people that will suffer the most. Because their purchasing power will continue to weaken. In some economic literature, CBN funding of deficit is described even as inflation tax. It's a tax on citizens, if you don't know. So if you are spending $1 trillion, $2 trillion from CBN to it's a tax. People pay for it in terms of the weakening of their currency. So we need to also look at that. We have a provision in the CBN Act. CBN is not supposed to fund deficit more than 5% of the actual revenue of the previous year. It's in the CBN Act. And if that is not repaid, the CBN, according to Act, should not give any further advances even for the following year. That is what is in the Act. And it is for a reason. The more you pump money from CBN into the system, the more inflationary it becomes. It's what we call high-powered money.
Yeah.
It's called inflation tax. And it has a way of accelerating poverty.
Yeah.
So we need to look at all these dimensions in the interest of the common people and in the interest of even investors in this economy. Because governance is about human beings. It's about the welfare of the people. You know?
I can't thank you enough. It's always a pleasure having you. I've been speaking to Dr. Muda Yusuf, and you see that passion there when it comes to economic issues, letting us understand what all of this means and how it impacts the Nigerians in general. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us. We really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Immediate past Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry.